Hey, what's up? This is ASAP Rocky here. Whenever we talk about the term techwear clothing, people seem to immediately go to one of two different areas. Firstly, you've got the luxury performance fashion from brands like Acronym. They combine advanced materials and features with utilitarian and futuristic looks, but unfortunately that combination of innovation, advanced construction, expensive materials, complex design makes the clothing pretty expensive. But then many people think of the polar opposite, a variety of brands and retailers which have sprung up almost as a response to the high cost of these techwear clothing brands. They sell extremely cheap clothing which ignores those luxury materials, performance elements, complex designs that prioritize both aesthetics and utility, instead creating garments which aim to replicate the look of techwear clothing. I suppose initially to satisfy those people who quite rightly looked at performance fashion prices and thought, that is not good. Retailers today fitting this latter category, thanks to the wonders of SEO and their ability to kit out influencers with product and affiliate codes, means that they're often the kinds of places that people stumble upon first. This gives them more exposure and a greater feeling of legitimacy than they perhaps should, because unfortunately almost all of these are dropshippers reselling Chinese clothing that's very cheap at a pretty significant markup, and this does bait less experienced buyers into purchasing from them. We've had our fair share of experiences buying from those kinds of places in the past, but for this video we're taking a different approach and going right to the heart of where many of those dropshippers source their goods: AliExpress. Doing this in theory will give us better access to clothing that falls under this aesthetic from a wider variety of brands, much better prices, and hopefully as well a greater chance of receiving the things that we're actually buying. Techwear Club. Essentially, I looked at three main ways of minimizing the chance of us getting absolute garbage. Number one is looking for reputable sellers, people who have high feedback ratings, have sold a lot of goods in the past, because they're much less likely to be advertising you one product and then shipping something different. Number two is picking items which named the brand they were from, i.e. it wasn't a retailer trying to pass off someone else's clothing as their own. It also means if we like something by a particular brand, we can return to them later and maybe pick up something else. Number three is trying to identify new releases, things that have AW21 in the title, for example, because then we're maximizing our chances of getting something kind of fresh and interesting and different, rather than something that's very common on the dropshippers to be selling the same things that have been available for like 5 years at this point. With those things in mind, I spent a long time browsing AliExpress and I picked out a bunch of things which I'm hoping represent the best that this website and this whole genre of sort of fast fashion techwear clothing has to offer. However good or bad that might be. Total cost of all of this stuff was about $270, most of it is ridiculously cheap, and indeed cheaper than the dropshippers that you find when you Google techwear shop or whatever. I bought from several different retailers, it took 2 to 3 weeks to arrive, came in nicer packaging than the dropshipped stuff as well. So is there good, cheap techwear clothing to be found? Let's have a look. We're starting off with some cargos, these things here, because they're often considered the kind of staple piece of techwear, and they also tend to be, at this price point, pretty bad. I went for this brand called Single Road on the basis that I didn't recognize the brand name, and I also didn't recognize the particular design of cargos, so perhaps not something that is typically available on dropshippers, at least at the moment. They cost $31, they came in a branded bag, and they're not that bad. Let me show you what I mean. Firstly, these actually fit correctly. Often with this stuff, the sizes are ridiculously short, and although yes, I did have to size all the way up to XXXL, whereas normally I would be medium or a large in cargos, these were actually the size that they were supposed to be on the size chart. Meaning you don't get that ridiculous look of cargos finishing halfway up the shin, instead these just about rest on the shoe. This, in my opinion, immediately makes them look better than many of the dropship things, even if the features or design elements are on the same level of not particularly great. The shape and layout of the cargo pockets I feel like is an easy way to tell that these are a kind of very basic fast fashion product. Not only do they look very simple, but you can see that this zip track as well, it kind of looks like it hasn't been sewn on correctly or something, because it's kind of buckling in a weird way. Admittedly, they are pretty easy to access, I suppose, and some of the sub-pockets are really small as well. They're just kind of secured with a Velcro, not really that useful, and they don't look particularly good, but it does give the intended look of technical-looking pants, I suppose, and they haven't resorted to too much cringy text on here or weird straps or anything like that. There is one example of text, though. There's this strange badge that's sewn on here, which essentially is talking about any imperfections are deliberate and they enhance the feeling of the garment or something like that. I can only assume this is lifted from somewhere else because it doesn't really make sense in the context of like Techwear cargos. These aren't like vintage or frayed or anything, so it just kind of reads like this is a get out of jail free card for the things being fairly low quality. It's also covered in typos and like weird spelling as well, as you might expect. Those defects definitely do enhance the Vintageth aspect of the garment. Fairly basic construction as well. They're basically joggers. They've got elasticated waist, elasticated cuff. They do have a little rudimentary knee pleat, which is nice, I suppose. But yeah, aside from that, it's pretty basic stuff. However, there's one key difference, which means that I would definitely choose to wear these over any of the other drop-shipped TaoBao cargos we've had the displeasure of looking at on this channel, and that is the material. So this is made of what I believe is a cotton elastane blend. Don't get me wrong, this is not like super premium feeling or anything like that, but it has a bit of stretch to it, and it just feels so much better than the cheap, horrible nylon that so many brands of this kind of price point fall into the trap of making these cargos from. It makes them a lot quieter to wear and a lot more comfortable to wear as well, not to mention far less sweaty as soon as you start moving around or doing anything. And yes, that does mean that these aren't going to be water resistant in any way, but when we're spending $30, I would far rather pick comfort over water resistance. So I think these meet the expectations of spending fast fashion money on cargos, and these are certainly the same sort of quality level, or in fact better than the $50 or $60 you could reasonably expect to spend on one of those Techwear dropshippers. Not everything is quite so wonderful though. I picked up this t-shirt from The Crocs, which I think is supposed to be pronounced The Cross, because get it? Cross. T-shirt should be a relatively safe bet, right? I sized up 1 to XL. It does seem to fit fine. It's a little bit oversized on the sleeves, but I think that's fine looks-wise. It doesn't feel that great. It's a pretty sort of basic feeling, slightly rough cotton, kind of midweight. It doesn't feel as nice as a Uniqlo t-shirt, and at $22, this was more expensive than those were. The graphic doesn't look too bad. It's got this cyberpunk kind of thing going on, and I actually think this looks less cringy than quite a lot of the sort of cut price cyberpunk clothing that's available out there. And dare I say, with something over the top of this, the print, because it's only on the sort of top left corner, actually looks more subtle than a lot of similar things. Wow, so futuristic and edgy. Oversized tag on the back as well, which, yes, of course, has numerous typos and weird grammar on it. Like, I know that you're churning these products out quickly and cheaply, but is it that hard to sort of spell check things before you print 1,000 of them? The irony of this saying, "we do out best, doing every product well," is the ultimate idea of our brand. Maybe you should start with the copy. We used the graphic language we created for the company, and it perfectly conveys the direction of the company. One of the first things I noticed out of the packet is that this actually smells really bad. It was like a mix of chemicals and smoke, which was really quite unpleasant. And although I have aired this out for a few days and it's mostly disappeared, I'm sure it would go away completely after a wash. It just kind of indicates that this was probably made very cheaply and in pretty bad conditions. The best part though is not on the garment itself, but on the tag that came with it. And if you thought these clothing typos were bad, just you wait until you get a load of this. Attention! To avoid danger of suffocation, keep this crafts away from beggars and maniac. Do not wear this crafts in washing room, office, carriages, or play dicks. This craft is not a shit. We make it by our imagination. We treat it link at artwork to things. We treat it link at artwork things. Thank you. Someone was definitely huffing bath salts before coming up with that, because I feel like I'm going insane just trying to make sense of it. One for the scrapbook, along with all the land combat Groot nonsense. Let's move on to something less embarrassing and harder to get wrong, and I can't show it because I'm actually wearing it at the moment. It's a belt. This came in at $35, and it looks pretty similar to far more expensive options from other brands. You even get a cute little key attachment type thing as well. And yes, I have to admit, this does a pretty good job of looking like a functional Techwear belt, and indeed operating like one, with the magnetic quick release buckle and the key attachment, and easy to adjust length with optional Techwear dangle, and you've even got a clip to hold the excess length as well. Some metal parts too, the webbing feels decent. It was also plenty long enough for me with a 34 inch waist. These kinds of buckles are great, I use them quite a lot, they're just super fun to play with, and I probably will end up using this belt. I'll just attach them to a pair of pants and then I've always got a belt on them. The reason this is so cheap is, despite looking almost identical, this does not use a genuine fidlock buckle. Essentially this part is fake. The plastic section sections have a slight scratchy feel to them, so there definitely is a quality difference between the real version and this one. I really wish they'd made their own design for a magnetic belt or purchased genuine Fidlock components, even if it would have made the final product more expensive. Because as it stands, I don't really want to recommend a product which is using fake parts. It's one thing to have something that is kind of derivative or inspired by something else, but yeah, this is kind of a level past that. If you value this buckle design, I would urge you to buy the genuine version if you can. The real versions have Fidlock sort of printed on them, so you can tell the difference. Now we have to check out the big piece, the hot ticket item, the jacket. This was from a brand called Silent Storm, and $105 is actually fairly expensive for your sort of AliExpress tier clothing, but as the point of this video, it's all about finding some of the best things here, so I was prepared to spend a little bit more on that basis. This doesn't look too bad in that it captures the overall utilitarian futuristic vibe whilst avoiding the cyberpunk text all over the windbreaker type thing that you'll often find in jackets at this kind of price point, making this look more technical, more sophisticated, and I think less cringe than some of that stuff. The overall form helps with this too. Using this rider jacket style collar and no hood is a clear difference to your standard windbreaker and a lot of the dropship stuff. Yes, that does limit its wet weather performance, but let's be honest, when we're talking clothing of this kind of price point, the hoods are generally pretty bad anyway, so you're not really losing that much. I like how the floating chest pockets look as well. I'm not sure how often I'd use these because they bulk out quite quickly and they're not that big, but they're not super hard to access at least. Another good thing about this is the material. Again, they've avoided the trap of using super cheap non-breathable nylon. Instead, this is a stretchy, soft shell kind of material. It does feel a little bit like shoulder dry skin, although of course it's not the same. It does feel kind of coarser, definitely less luxurious in hand. It doesn't quite drape the same as well, which I suppose is fair enough because if you were going to make this jacket from actual dry skin, the cost of the fabric alone would be well over $100. Despite the fabric being much better and more comfortable than that cheap nylon stuff, I don't find this jacket amazingly comfortable on me. Despite sizing up to XL, which is the biggest size, I would normally have medium in a jacket like this. The shoulders are a little bit tight on me and the sleeves come up a bit short as well. That really impacts how this feels to wear. It's just a little bit sort of constrained, so this is definitely not suitable if you're tall or wide. Something I thought was interesting though, and really very common of this type of clothing, is that they've basically taken a bunch of different ideas from existing products and just kind of mashed them all into one. The collar and the off-axis zip are reminiscent of the acronym J68, of which the most recent version came out not that long before this jacket came to market, but they've simplified the front, removing those multiple closures, so taking away some of the nuance and the interesting parts of that jacket, instead replacing it with those floating pockets, I suppose to give it a bit of visual differentiation. It also has some transformative functionality with the bottom panel zipping off. This is in the same style as the Riot Division Lizard Parker that we looked at many years back, and I'm sure there have been other jackets as well which have already used this functionality. I don't think this pairs massively well with this jacket. It looks a little bit out of place having this expansion panel on a jacket that's quite sort of busy up top and has this rider jacket-like appearance, which is normally cropped by nature. But then again, I didn't really like the expansion panel on the most recent J28 either, so maybe this just isn't my style. The inside though is the same grid pattern popularized by Gorilla Group in like the mid-2010s and has since been knocked off by so many other Chinese techwear brands. And it's kind of funny that now Gorilla Group has moved away not just from the use of this pattern, but this whole aesthetic, changing the way that they put out their brand multiple times into this season is going for, I don't know, some kind of post-Lunar Core stuff. Anyway, these elements combined leave me rolling my eyes a little bit that there are so many features that just kind of feel like they've been lifted from elsewhere and then recycled into a new product. But I suppose overall it's still better than the other dropshipped jackets that we've looked at before. The little Sacoche bag from 1516 next. I think this is kinda cute. It's made from X-Pac, it's got some YKK zips on here. It's got a surprising amount of functionality, I suppose, in that the main pocket is subdivided into multiple little sub-pockets. Contrast lining on the inside as well is a nice touch, making it easier to see the things inside the bag. There's an additional front pocket on here as well. The main pocket is just about big enough to fit a switch in. That gives you you the kind of idea of size and carrying capacity. The extra little corners of material here give the bag a bit of personality, which I quite like, and they have put the brand's logo there as well, but it's tonal, so it's nice and subtle. The other thing is, inside this bag, it came with multiple little alternative zip pulls, which I thought was very cute, and they're actually not on the product page, so that was a nice little bonus. The strap is pretty thin and basic, which is actually okay on a bag of this size and weight. You don't necessarily need a mega heavy duty strap. There are some bits which are kind of positive and negative. They use these quick release straps in a similar fashion to bags that we have already checked out on this channel. They don't really work quite as well though. In a sense, it's a good thing that they've put this on both sides of the shoulder part here. It means that you can wear this bag over either shoulder in theory and still use the quick release functionality. You keep the side that you don't want to use a bit tighter and secure, and then you use the other one sort of accordingly to tighten or loosen the bag. I also find that this doesn't seem to tighten or loosen quite as easily as bags with this type of functionality. I've also managed to totally twist the strap up, so that's me being stupid here. Unfortunately, mine as well came with a pretty significant glue mark on the front here, which I've kind of tried to remove. I think I might be able to get this off if I just like keep picking at it. Eventually it'll remove itself. Hopefully that's a bit of a one-off. Pretty cheap and cheerful though, hard to be disappointed by something like this, I feel. And one final thing as well, same brand as the jacket, this teeny tiny little Silent Storm pouch. This was like $10, I think. Clips onto a belt or pretty much anything if you wanted to. It also has MOLLE webbing compatible little bits on the back too, so you can attach this to a bigger bag or pretty much anything if you want. Doesn't have a massive storage capacity, of course, but it's a tiny little pouch. What more can you expect? This is quite basic, obviously. It's a bit plasticky as well, what with these bits of hardware. But yeah, this is like $10, and again, it does what it looks like it's going to do. It just gives you a little extra accessory, bit of visual detail. So yeah, hard to go wrong. Kind of cool. Overall, while it certainly wasn't all bad here, and I feel like I had a better experience overall than some of those previous retailers, there are inconsistencies and downsides with each garment that do get in the way of me wanting to recommend them, and it's something that feels like it's endemic with clothing of this kind of price point. I mean, when a graphic tee is the most disappointing item, it kind of suggests there is still some risk buying from these kinds of brands. I can certainly claim a better experience than using those dropshippers though, and in those videos I recommended checking out AliExpress if you wanted that type of clothing at a lower price, and now we have this direct experience. I think I would still give that recommendation, particularly when you can in theory return stuff. It was packaged better, and one of the retailers even answered a question that I had about the jacket sizing. All in all, I do feel like we got what we paid for, and we can't be too upset, for example, that a $30 pair of cargos are lacking in functionality or sort of nuanced or original design. At least you could conceivably wear these individual items, and they're at the kind of price point where it's not a big deal if you decide that later you do want to buy something that's of a sort of higher quality overall. As a general point though, as an alternative to this kind of clothing, I would still recommend checking out more performance-centric clothing. I feel like for me, that's a really big part of the appeal of this aesthetic and this techwear subculture, if you want to call it that. The integration of performance fabrics and features with this style of clothing, that genuine advanced stuff. And if you go back through the other videos, there's of course loads of content on different brands and pieces here. But in general, I suppose secondhand shopping and end of season sales are definitely your friend. I do believe it's worth though, rather than big techwear clothing haul that we did here, instead purchasing fewer better items, because once you get some of those really nice things, it really does feel like a game changer. And definitely remember that brands and retailers do not have to use the word techwear clothing in order for it to be appropriate for this kind of style. In fact, you won't find that term used by any of the most reputable brands out there. That's all for the AliExpress adventure. Let me know what you thought of these pieces here. Was there any one individually that was your favorite? I think for me, it's the belt and the little pouch. It's those small items that I'm going to end up getting the most use out of. And I think it's the bigger things where you really see that difference in quality between the sort of fast fashion cheap stuff and the more premium items. Really hope you guys enjoyed the video though. If you did, please give it a like. It is massively appreciated, and we'll do more of this stuff if it's something that you guys want to see. Anyway, that's all for this week. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for your support on the sneaker dyeing video from last week, and it was really cool to hear so many of you inspired by that to try something like that for yourselves. I thought that was really cool. Definitely tag me in your cool creations. I want to see them. Thanks for making it to the end of the video though. If you want to catch them all, there's going to be links going up at the top. If you haven't subscribed yet, then I don't know what you're playing at. There's over 100,000 of us, and there's going to be even more. So definitely consider subscribing, because we've got more cool videos, more cool videos on the way. We got some more cheap stuff, we got some more luxury stuff, we got some things in between as well, maybe some more DIY stuff since you guys enjoyed that. Stick around. Yeah.